Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast, where we provide you with your weekly diagnosis of everything fantasy football. Whether it's season-long leagues, dynasty, DFS, or sometimes even IDP, we got you covered all year long. Let's do it. Let's get to it. Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast. It is Wednesday, December 20th. I'm your host, John June, at the real _JJ. Well, at the real John J _FF on Twitter and Instagram. Obviously, host of the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast. No Greg today, so it's a solo pod, but no worries. We've done this before. We'll do it again. You guys know I'm built for this. So jumping into week 16, hopefully a lot of you guys made it into the second round of your fantasy playoffs, or maybe if you're playing in the week 18, it is the first round of your fantasy playoff. So just coming on here, obviously going to discuss some Thursday night football, game between the Rams and the Saints. Going to discuss the Saturday games as well as the 1 p.m. games, and hopefully help you guys with your fantasy lineups. If you are watching live on YouTube, Twitter, or formerly known as Twitter, now known as X, or Twitch, make sure you go ahead and subscribe, hit the notification bell, ask some questions in the comment section as well. Would love to interact with whatever guests we can today during a live stream. I know we've had some difficulties getting back to being live in these last several weeks, and we've had episodes that haven't come on as live shows. They were pre-recorded episodes that were put out as live episodes. So again, apologies for that, but we're rolling now. So obviously, if you are listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, that doesn't impact you, hasn't really impacted you much, but definitely appreciate you listening in as well. Hope you can go ahead and leave a rating and review for the pod. Definitely helps us out, especially if we've helped you get this far. Even if you're not in the fantasy playoffs, we talked about the importance of continuing to listen, continuing to take in this content, because next year, when August, September hits, I'll be drafting sooner than that, but when August, September hits and you're trying to get accustomed to the fantasy landscape and you're wondering how a guy like Sam Laporta is going as high as he is, or how a guy like James Cook might end up being a first round running back this time next year in redraft leagues, you're going to want to remember back to this time here during these fantasy playoffs when these guys were, getting, some legitimate work and putting out some legitimate production here. So definitely want to keep with it, even if you're not in the fantasy playoffs. If your league has some kind of like last place punishment or something, then, obviously you want to keep playing. But, even if you don't have, a horse in the race, maybe you even, maybe you don't go as far as to picking people up off waivers, depending on the rules that your league might have, but maybe you just continue to set your lineup, right? Continue to identify who would I pick up off waivers if I was trying to, win my matchup this week, right? So continue to go through the exercise. This is a game where we can learn a lot. We can try to get better any ways that we can, not just, as drafters, but how do we manage a team during the season, right? So think back to some of the mistakes you made, write down some notes for your league. If you remember, hey, I wasn't so aggressive on a guy like Kyron Williams, or I wasn't very aggressive on Puka Nacua, write down why, maybe you might have not been so aggressive on them, and maybe you can learn from that next year when week 1 comes and, a guy comes like out the gate, and a guy like Kyron Williams, a guy that I wasn't super aggressive on in a lot of leagues, and I wish I was, right? Because he's been, probably will be a league winner this year. So enough of that. Let's get into Thursday night football. Discuss Thursday night on Prime as the 7-7 New Orleans Saints travel to Los Angeles to take on the 7-7 Los Angeles Rams. This game has a 44.5 point total, where the Los Angeles Rams are 4.5 point favorites. In terms of this matchup here, I'm going to take the over. I'm going to go with the Rams to cover in this one. I will also go with the Rams to win this game here. Impressive win by the Saints, playing against the Giants, who do play hard. So it was obviously a nice win for the Saints there. Derek Carr played well. The Rams also coming off a win. Both these teams trying to keep their seasons alive. The Saints are in contention for the NFC South here, so this is a big game for them. And the Rams are in contention for a wild card spot. So both these teams with something to play for. That's usually makes for good fantasy situations this late in the season. As I look at these matchups here, Kyren Williams, man, I just talked about him, and possibly a league winner, has to be an RB1. I think at this time, right now, as we're in the fantasy playoffs, Christian McCaffrey, James Cook, Kyren Williams, maybe not necessarily in that order. Maybe I'd flip-flop Kyren and James Cook, although James Cook has been really something, man. But back to the original topic, getting off track here. Kyren Williams, man, an RB1 for sure. I think you got to feel really good going into the fantasy playoffs with him as your RB1, or depending on where you got him, if maybe he's your RB2 there. But I really like this matchup for him. New Orleans historically looks like a bad matchup for opposing running backs, but in recent weeks they've allowed some running backs to have some solid games. I know they shut Saquon down last week, so maybe that's not the shining example there, but Kyren Williams is going to continue to see a lot of work, continue to see work by the goal line. I think he's almost a lock to score a touchdown. So, yeah, definitely like Kyren this week. Matthew Stafford had the big game last week. New Orleans has been a pretty good pass defense, pretty good for against opposing quarterbacks. So, not going to look to Stafford this week as anything more than QB2. I think Kupp and Puka Nacua are probably wide receiver 2s. One of them could obviously finish with wide receiver 1 upside. On the New Orleans Saints side, Chris Olave seems like he's a go. So I think he's a wide receiver 1. This matchup against the Rams is very good. The Rams allow the third most PPR points to the position over their last 3 matchups here. And so I look at this as a spot. I mean, I know Olave's been in some really nice spots, but obviously we saw what Terry McLaurin was able to do. Curtis Samuel obviously scored 2 touchdowns there. And this is a good matchup for Derek Carr as well. The Rams allowed the third most fantasy points to the quarterback position over that last 3 games. So I know we hate to say that when Carr has a good matchup that it's worth playing him, because he's usually screwed us over in this spot. But I think that's one that if you're desperate, if you need, maybe your Stroud's not going to go and you need a bunch of upside in your lineup because you're playing against the Kyren Williams manager or the Christian McCaffrey manager, then yeah, I would take a shot on Derek Carr there. I mean, that's the situation where I'm breaking the emergency glass. But I think between Carr and Olave, there should be some really nice production here in the pass game. I also think Rashid Shaheed is interesting. Was able to come back last week from a quad injury that plagued him earlier in the year or several weeks ago. So, this is also an intriguing matchup for him, as well as, the Rams have been giving up plays like deep down the field as well. So Alvin Kamara, obviously an RB1. I don't think much needs to be said there. As we move forward in this game in terms of bold predictions, Greg is not here, so there's not really much that's going to stop me from getting wild with this parlay here. So I'm just going to kind of just go through it. It's like a decent amount, 6 legs here. All from this game, but it's try to make it worth it with some reasonable, some things that have a reasonable chance of actually happening, right? So, Cooper Kupp 4+ receptions, that is -670. Puka Nacua 4+ receptions, that is -420. Kyren Williams 60+ rushing yards, -450. Alvin Kamara, 40+ rushing yards, -240. Kyren Williams, anytime touchdown, -220. and then an Alvin Kamara anytime touchdown, that's plus 105. Those 6 together is a plus 566. So $10 to win $56.66 or 60 cents, something like that. So that is my bold prediction for and by bold prediction, I mean my prop bets for the New Orleans Saints and LA Rams game on Thursday Night Football. So let's jump into some streams of the week. And my quarterback stream of the week this week is going to be Jake Browning. 46% rostered in Yahoo leagues, going up against Pittsburgh, who have allowed the 15th most fantasy points to the quarterback position over their last 3 matchups. Of all the quarterbacks over their last 3 starts, and this is a question to the audience here, where would you think Jake Browning ranks in fantasy points per game? And if you said third, you're correct, because he ranks third in fantasy points per game, again, of all quarterbacks over the last 3 starts, behind only Brock Purdy and Josh Allen. And Browning now gets a matchup against Pittsburgh, and a Pittsburgh team that is reeling now. They've just allowed 215 passing yards and 3 touchdowns to Gardner Minshew, who was my stream of the week last week. And I get it, there's no Jamar Chase, but he still has T. Higgins, still has Tyler Boyd, who should have a nice opportunity here in the slot against Pittsburgh. And he's got these running backs out the backfield in Joe Mixon and Chase Brown. So Jake Browning has been, very good asset here for quarterback for quarterback managers that might have lost Joe Burrow or they lost CJ Stroud in recent weeks. This has been really good. Or if maybe you were a Josh Dobbs manager and you were living off of that, right? So Jake Browning's been really good and a really nice addition to the fantasy landscape here for those in need of quarterbacks. Moving on to my tight end stream of the week, I'm going with Hunter Henry. He's been really good in his last 2 games. Had a 2-touchdown game 2 weeks ago, and then had a 9-target, 7-catch game just last week, scoring another touchdown in that game. And he's got a great matchup here against Denver. We've been targeting Denver all year. They've allowed the 7th most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games. Obviously, they allowed the 3-touchdown performance to Sam Laporta last week. Don't think Hunter Henry's going to replicate that, but if there's one way to attack this Denver defense, which improved and has had some rough spots these last several weeks, but for the most part has been much better than the team that gave up 70 points to the Dolphins early in the year. There it is through the tight end position. So Hunter Henry, 27% rostered in Yahoo leagues. Definitely a nice streaming option here in what would be Bailey Zappi's 3rd start. So moving on to my defensive stream of the week, I'm going with the Chicago Bears, 26% rostered in Yahoo leagues, going up against Arizona. Chicago has been a much better defense since trading for Montez Sweat, and they've been a very good defense each of these last several weeks here. They've accumulated over their last 3 games a total of 10 sacks, 9 interceptions, 1 fumble recovery, and 1 defensive touchdown during that span. And they get to close it out here with Arizona and Atlanta. That's 2 games where they should be favored, and quarterbacks who you want to play against between Kyler Murray, who takes a fair number of sacks, and then Taylor Heineke, who could take some sacks but also throw you some interceptions. So I said this last week when I had Chicago here in this spot as my defensive stream of the week, that this is a team that you could ride through the fantasy playoffs, through championship week. Not sure where they I could pull it up really quick who they play against in week 18 for those that are playing in the week 18 championship. But they are a really good defense since that edition, and for some reason Yahoo's not showing it to me, but I will get it in a second. But they've been a really good fantasy defense, and Montez Sweat has made such an impact for them on the defensive line, causing havoc, getting sacks. So I think it's definitely a move that we can make here, and again, like I said, through the fantasy playoffs, they play Green Bay in Week 18, so not a matchup that I'm particularly afraid of there. So we'll see. Obviously, see how it goes. Week 18, maybe there's not that much competition for defenses. So you could have probably your pick of the litter, but I feel really comfortable riding it out with Arizona here, Chicago here, I should say, going up against Arizona this week. So rounding out these rest of these games here for the weekend, these Saturday games, we got 2 Saturday games this week. The 8-6 Cincinnati Bengals traveling to Pittsburgh to take on the 7-7 Pittsburgh Steelers, where this game has a 37.5 point total. Cincinnati Bengals are 2.5 point favorites on the road here. I am going to take the over. I am going to take Cincinnati to cover. I will also take Cincinnati to win this game. Joe Mixon, he's an RB1 for me this week. T. Higgins, we're going to be a wide receiver 2 with some wide receiver 1 upside. Obviously going to have no Jamar Chase this week. That's been widely reported. So T. Higgins slides into that alpha role. And basically how I've been treating Jamar Chase all year without Joe Burrow is how I'm going to start treating T. Higgins, where he's a wide receiver 2 with some wide receiver 1 upside. Should see, a significant target share here without Jamar Chase in the lineup. So definitely expecting a huge bump for him, as we saw in the game when Jamar Chase exited. All of the offensive attentions strictly in the pass game went to T. Higgins at that point. Chase Brown, I think, is an RB2 that you can play if you are in need of a running back. Tyler Boyd, I think, is a wide receiver 3 option, has a nice matchup in the slot against Pittsburgh, who historically has been a team where you could attack in that area of the field. So definitely like that. I also like Tanner Hudson this week. So Jake Browning, obviously my quarterback stream of the week. I think he's a high tier quarterback too. So on the Pittsburgh side, it's really tough there. Mason Rudolph is going to get the start here in place of Mitch Trubisky, who's filling in for the injured Kenny Pickett. So Najee Harris and Jalen Warren, I think they're both RB3s. Each one has some RB2 upside associated with them, but it's hard to really call it. Najee Harris is going to get those opportunities at the goal line. Curious to see how Pittsburgh reacts after, his situation with the fumble, because he didn't play much after the fumble there, hence the low production last week, but something to keep an eye on. Obviously, I guess we'll have to see how press conferences and things go the rest of this week, but it would make me nervous to start Najee Harris in this game. Deontay Johnson seems to be finishing as a wide receiver 2 every week, each of the last 3 weeks, scoring a touchdown in each of those games. So I think you just got to – I don't like to chase the dragon, but when you look at this Pittsburgh offense right now, he's the only thing they got going for them. So I think it's a pretty good bet to keep going to the Deontay Johnson well. Hard to trust George Pickens, though. Curious to see, how the quarterback change impacts him the most, but I can't recommend sticking him in the lineup when he's done, really nothing all year. So Pat Freiermuth has a great matchup this week against Cincinnati. Last time he played these guys, that was his 10 or 11 catch effort. So definitely would like to go back to this well with Freiermuth. But I think that's about it in this game. Should be an interesting one. Cincinnati continuing to play for their playoff lives. Pittsburgh has an outside chance, but the way things are going right now, it's really tough to see them getting to that place where they're playing consistently good football and they're winning these games here to finish down the home stretch here and make it to the playoffs. So, moving on to this next matchup here, we've got the 8-6 Buffalo Bills traveling to Los Angeles to take on the 5-9 Los Angeles Chargers. This game has a 42.5 point total, where the Buffalo Bills are 10.5 point favorites on the road here. Buffalo is absolutely rolling right now. They're playing some really good football, both sides of the ball here. So definitely like them to cover this spread and win this game. Definitely going to take the under here with how their defense is playing and what looked like their willingness to just take their foot off the gas here against Dallas. I could just see this end up being a slow paced game here. Josh Allen, I think he's a QB1. This is a great matchup for him. Just the Los Angeles defense as a whole has not been very good. So, but Josh Allen can take advantage through the ground and through the air. James Cook, thank you. He's an RB1, like bona fide top 3 option at the position this week, in my opinion. The Chargers allow the 6th most fantasy points to the running back position over their last 3 games, and James Cook has been absolutely cooking these last several games, especially in the Joe Brady era, as we mentioned before. So Stephon Diggs has had some down games, but the targets still come. They're still there. So I'd like him to finish as a potential wide receiver 2 this week. And Dalton Kincaid, that's an interesting conversation. I wish Greg was here to I could get his opinion on it. Maybe I'll ask him tomorrow. But I really can't trust Dalton Kincaid. I mean, had to 0 last week, and just the way that the Buffalo Bills are playing, it like even Stephon Diggs is having down games. It's hard to trust anybody, and when you throw in the Dawson Knox you throw Dawson Knox into the equation, it makes it even tougher for me to go there. And then last but not least, the matchup there, 23rd most PPR points allowed to the position the Chargers do. So there's not really a lot of signals here that make me want to play Dalton Kincaid. But I've been wrong more than once this year. I've been wrong plenty of times throughout my career doing this or my time doing this. So, could totally be here, but the process is telling me I don't want to play Kincaid here. Ty Johnson, I think he could be an interesting running back option if this game does go, the way Buffalo, I guess, would want it to go, just blowing the doors off the Chargers here. I think Ty Johnson makes a ton of sense as an RB3 if you're really desperate. If you were playing Clyde Edwards-Helaire because maybe Jonathan Taylor was helping you out and he doesn't play, or whatever that situation is, and you couldn't get Trey Sermon. I think Ty Johnson makes a ton of sense as somebody that you could just kind of stick in your lineup if you need, a floor play here. So definitely, fantasy playoffs, we want to play the guys that got us here. We want to play our good players, but sometimes we got to do something a little nasty and play somebody we have no business playing, right? Like Demarcus Robinson was that guy last week. So, in this on the Chargers side, it's really tough. Austin Eckler has been very tough to trust. I mean, had obviously a great outing 2 weeks ago, but just has not been a steady, top 3, top 5 pick that you're expecting to help win you games, help win you matchups. He's had a few of those games, but and then to just add how well Buffalo has been playing as well, allowing the 30th most fantasy points to the position, PPR points to the position over the last 3 games. It's really tough to play Eckler, who's also like in a time split right now, right? I mean, Isaiah Spiller's seeing a lot of work. Joshua Kelly's seeing a lot of work. And that was, you could say, well, oh, John, they were basically being blown out last week. And yeah, I agree with that. And, maybe they were trying to protect their veteran and in a game that was already out of hand and there's no need to play him. But at the same time, look what happened the week before in a game that they were in, that they were trying to win. And off the back of Brandon Staley at the time talking about how, yeah, we're going to look at potentially getting more touches to Joshua Kelly and Isaiah Spiller. And Isaiah Spiller ended up getting a decent amount of work in both of these last 2 games. So, again, no Brandon Staley. Kellen Moore is still there. So who knows how that shifts, right? But it's just hard to trust Austin Eckler. I would rather not play Austin Eckler this week, live with the result. If I make it to the fantasy playoffs next week, I'd rather play Ty Chandler over Austin Eckler, assuming Alexander Madison doesn't go. Me and Greg are playing Gus Edwards this week in a matchup against San Francisco over Austin Eckler in a very important league, high-stakes league there. So it is – yeah, I just can't trust Austin Eckler. I'd rather, prove me wrong this week and then, next week we could revisit in championship week. Joshua Palmer, I think he's a wide receiver 3 that you can go to if you're desperate. I mean, Buffalo's been playing much better defensively, much better as a pass defense, but they still allow the 12th most PPR points to the wide receiver position. So, if you're desperate, you can go with Joshua Palmer as a wide receiver 3, but I don't really want to tie myself to Easton Stick. Not a great showing that was last week for Easton Stick or the Chargers in general, but Joshua Palmer obviously was able to get it done later in the game. So nothing else from me on this game. Moving on to the 8-6 Indianapolis Colts traveling to Atlanta to take on the 6-8 Atlanta Falcons. This game has a 44.5-point total where the Indianapolis Colts are 1.5-point favorites. Now, I am obviously aware that the Atlanta Falcons are benching Desmond Ridder in lieu of, or rather to go with Taylor Heineke. I don't think that makes much of a difference. I've spoken about this earlier in the year. Like Heineke I think he was definitely better than Kyle Allen back in Washington. And he was definitely better than the other name escapes me of who it was. But I think him and Desmond Ridder are like the same person. So, Desmond Ridder, a bit more athletic, can boogie a little bit more. I mean, Heineke boogies, but, Ridder, a little bit bigger, stronger, longer strider. I don't really see much of a difference. So I'm taking the over here, taking Indianapolis to cover, taking Indianapolis to win. I think Bijan Robinson, he's an RB2. I know it's super hard to trust him after last week, but I think if we learned anything about Arthur Smith, and maybe this is totally off basis here, but the last time this happened where Bijan Robinson barely touched the ball, we saw Bijan Robinson get the ball a ton. And obviously that was different circumstance. Bijan was quote unquote sick, had a migraine. So quite different situation. Bijan has had some issues with some fumbles this year. So this could have been, the straw that broke the camel's back there in a sense for Arthur Smith and the Falcons. But I'm just going to trust that Arthur Smith wants to win this game. He wants to keep his job, and he's going to utilize his number 8 overall pick in Bijan Robinson. Again, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe rational coaching is a fallacy. Probably super tough to trust Bijan going into this, but I would be sick if I left Bijan on the bench and there was 24 points there on the bench, because it's right. This is different than the Austin Eckler situation. Austin Eckler's been getting the opportunities. It's just been doing nothing with them. Where Bijan, it's more like, hey, let's get this guy the rock, right? And let's go. And you have to hope at a point, and maybe this is to a detriment, but you got to hope to a point that the coaching staff realizes that, hey, we probably should get number 7 the football. Because, I would like to think that they are being paid as highly as they are for their jobs, that they could clearly see something like that here. So enough of that. Drake London, I think, is a wide receiver 3. This matchup here is tough. Indianapolis was one that we used to target the wide receivers against, but they've been much better in recent weeks. But again, I feel like this is another one where Drake London is going to get hyper targeted here, highly concentrated in his direction. And so I'm confident in him as a wide receiver 3 this week. On the Indianapolis side, Michael Pittman Jr. took that ridiculous hit where DeMonte Casey is now suspended for the NFL season, the rest of the NFL season. So, right or wrong, that was a vicious hit. So that's the kind of hit that has to get out of the game. Regardless, Michael Pittman Jr., if he can go, I think he's a wide receiver 2 in this matchup. Atlanta has allowed the 30th most PPR points to the position, but Michael Pittman Jr. is just a target hog, and we're just going to go at him. Wherever he goes, we go. Honestly, I don't care about the matchup there for him. Need to see how the Indianapolis backfield sorts itself out. It's not a terrible matchup here by any means. Atlanta allows the 19th most PPR points to the position, but there's a possibility Jonathan Taylor plays this week. Zach Moss, who was dealing with an arm injury, he's pushing to play as well. And if either of those guys can't go, I think Trey Sermon and Tyler Goodson, obviously, they showed good enough that they could form a committee here, a two-man backfield here against Atlanta. So I would keep my eye out on that situation and see how that goes and just monitor it throughout the week. But this is a good spot for any of these guys that go, and I'd be willing to start Sermon and Goodson as, RB, maybe Sermon as an RB2, low on RB2 with some, our high RB2, low RB1 upside. I think Goodson could fit in as an RB3 potentially, low end flex. And then if Moss goes, I think he's an RB2, volume dependent RB2. And then if JT goes, he's an RB1, right? So that's how I would slice that situation. Moving on to this next matchup, the 6-8 Green Bay Packers traveling to Carolina to take on the 2-12 Carolina Panthers. This game has a 36.5 point total. The Green Bay Packers are 4.5 point favorites on the road. I think Jordan Love is a QB2 here. Not a fantastic matchup by any means. Carolina has been much better defensively in these last several weeks, playing on a lot of games where they're keeping the low scores. I'm going with the under here. I'm going with Carolina to cover, going with Green Bay to win. But Carolina has been playing much better defensively, allowing the 30th most fantasy points to the quarterback position, 29th to the running back, 26th to the wide receiver, and then 21st to the tight end. So not a great spot for any of the Packers pieces here. I think Jordan Love is a QB2. Jaden Reed going to be a wide receiver 3. I think with some wide receiver 2 upside. Seems like he's been basically a lock to score every week. Romeo Doubs will probably be a wide receiver 3. Dontavian Wicks probably would be intriguing to me in a different matchup. This one is tough. I don't think he's anything more than like a low end or mid-tier wide receiver 3. I'd have him over Dobbs though. Aaron Jones, I think, is an RB2 this week. Tucker Kraft has tight end 1 upside. Christian Watson, whether he's active or not active, I don't think you can play him. So yeah, I'm not doing that there. For Carolina, Chuba Hubbard, I think, is an RB1 in a plus matchup here. I mean, Green Bay, they've been tore up by running backs, 11th most PPR points allowed to the position over their last 3 games here. So definitely like Chuba Hubbard to have a good game in this one. I've been banging the Chuba drum all year, it feels like, and finally I think it's going to really come to fruition to a place where it's going to help us out here. Adam Thielen and Jonathan Mingo, they should both see a decent amount of targets. In this one, can both be high volume wide receiver 3s for me. Moving on to this next matchup here, the 9-5 Cleveland Browns traveling to Houston to take on the 8-6 Houston Texans. This game has a 42.5 point total, where the Houston Texans are this line moved. This line changed significantly. It's the Cleveland Browns. The total is 40.5, so 2.5 under what it was before. And the Cleveland Browns are the 2.5 point favorites here. It's right on the screen, just wrong in my notes. So in this one, I'm going to take the over on the 40.5. I did like the over on 42.5, but that was obviously assuming Case Keenum could play. I like the Cleveland Browns to cover the 2.5. I like the Cleveland Browns to win the game here. I think Joe Flacco is a QB2. This is a halfway decent spot here for him. Cleveland allows the 19th most PPR points to the position, or 19th most points to the position. And then David Njoku has been on a roll here. I think he's a tight end 1. You obviously have to play. Matchup is tough. Houston allows the 29th most PPR points to the position here, but think that Njoku has been so good and has seen enough target volume that you just have to continue to ride that wave. Amari Cooper are going to be a wide receiver 2 for me this week. Jerome Ford, an RB3. On the Houston side, there's no Stroud, so Case Keenum likely to make his second straight start. Nico Collins, I think, is a wide receiver 2 with some wide receiver 1 upside if he goes. Devin Singletary is an RB1. I think he's earned that here. Dalton Schultz is a tight end one. If he can, he's obviously going to go. I think he was able to do well last week as a tight end one. The matchup here is pretty good. Cleveland allows the 6th most PPR points to the position, so I think Dalton Schultz is in a nice spot, even if Case Keenum is the starter here. And Noah Brown is a wide receiver 3 who definitely gets an upgrade for me if Collins has to sit this one out. Moving on to the 10-4 Detroit Lions traveling to Minnesota to take on the 7-7 Minnesota Vikings, where this game has a 3-point total. This game has a 46.5 point total, and the Detroit Lions are 3-point favorites. I'm going to take the under here. I'm going to take Detroit to cover. I will take Detroit to win this game. In the terms of this game here, Sam Laporta, I think, is a tight end 1. Obviously, we talked about all the things that he's chasing with the rookie records between yards and touchdowns and catches. So he needs 10 more catches. He needs like 106 yards a game, and he needs, I think, 2 or 3 more touchdowns. So all those except for the yardage probably doable there. So going to be chasing some of those there with Sam Laporta. Jahmyr Gibbs is an RB1. I think he's earned that. Amon-Ra St. Brown, a wide receiver 1, and David Montgomery is an RB2. Jared Goff, probably a QB2 for me in this spot. Nick Mullins is a QB2. This is purely, we're in like super flex territory with these guys here. Jared Goff obviously had the big game last week, but I don't think you can bank on him replicating that this week. Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson are wide receiver 2s with obviously the bump going to Justin Jefferson here. And then TJ Hawkinson is a tight end 1 in this spot. Revenge game for Hawkinson. He gets 2 of these a year, so don't know at one point. I'm sure they all feel the same, right? Like, except for the first one. The first one probably had to be like, oh, they got rid of me. But every week he's probably hyping himself up for this game. Regardless, doesn't matter. No, Hawkinson's still really good. You're going to play him regardless of whether Detroit allows the 24th most PPR points to the position there. So moving on to this next matchup here, we've got the 4-10 Washington Commanders traveling to MetLife to take on the 5-9 New York Jets. This game has a 37.5 point total, and the New York Jets are 3-point favorites. This game probably has no significance to much of anyone. Both these teams are playing for draft positioning. However, this is somewhat of a June family bowl here, as my brother is a Commanders fan. So, the Jets have they won the last 2. Yep, they won the last 2. So, hopefully they get this one as well. But I'm going with the under here. I'm going with the Commanders to cover the 3 points. I know it's weird, but these teams are weird. And I'm taking the Jets to win the game here. That's the weird part. Washington to cover 3 points, Jets to win. But Breece Hall, I think, is an RB1 because of the matchup. Washington has been very porous against the running back position, allowing they've been porous on defense basically everywhere. They've allowed the 2nd most PPR points to the running back position. So Breece Hall in a great spot, despite having been like sometimes dreadful. But again, in great spots, he's done really well here. So hoping that he comes through this week. And then Garrett Wilson is a wide receiver 2, only because of the matchup here. It's so tough to trust him. I trust Breece Hall more than I trust Garrett Wilson this week because you might not have Zach Wilson, who's in concussion protocol, as crazy as that sounds, but Trevor Siemian will get the start. I have trust issues when it comes to Trevor Siemian getting Garrett Wilson the football. So we'll see. Washington allows the most PPR points to the wide receiver position. But like I said, Garrett Wilson's probably going to be wide receiver 2 for me. And then on the Washington side, there's not much, right? Like, you don't want to go at the Jets defense. Terry McLaurin, he had the big game last week, but you're not playing any of these Washington receivers. You're not playing Sam Howell. The Jets allow the 32nd most fantasy points to the quarterback position. They allowed the 32nd most PPR points to the wide receiver position over the last 3 games. Obviously, they gave up the big game to Waddle, but that is Mike McDaniel, Jalen Waddle, more than I believe that it was the Jets' pass defense just being bad or giving up on the season. DJ Reed had an off day. So I'm not going to go into the teeth of this Jets defense with any one of these Washington pass catchers here. What I do want, what I am interested in is if Brian Robinson can go. If he can go, I would like to start him. The Jets, they can be beat up on the ground, 14th most PPR points allowed to the running back position. So if Robinson goes, I'd like to start him as an RB2 with some RB1 upside. If he doesn't go, then I guess Antonio Gibson was in the doghouse again. I would then go with Chris Rodriguez in that spot. So this game again, not of much interest to many. Jets defense, I would load up on. Washington defense, quite possibly, because there could be some sacks. But I don't know. Every time I feel like I do this, this game hits the over. So moving on to the last and final game that we will cover today, the 7-7 Seattle Seahawks traveling to Tennessee to take on the 5-9 Tennessee Titans. This game has a 42.5 point total, where the Seattle Seahawks are 2.5 point favorites on the road. Seattle coming off a thrilling Monday night win over the Philadelphia Eagles. This game I'm taking the under in this game. I'm taking the Seattle Seahawks to cover, taking the Seattle Seahawks to win the game here. Kenneth Walker, an RB1, had a phenomenal game last week, Monday night against the Eagles. Was just doing typical Kenneth Walker stuff, reversing field, making people miss. He's a really talented runner, man. So RB1 in this spot against Tennessee, who allows the 10th most PPR points to the running back position. Geno Smith, he is a QB2 for me in this spot. DK Metcalf, a strong wide receiver 2 with some wide receiver 1 upside. Tyler Lockett, probably a wide receiver 3 with some wide receiver 1 upside. wide receiver 3 with some wide receiver 2 upside. And then JSN, probably like a wide receiver 3 flex option, who obviously can get into the wide receiver 2 range there. DeAndre Hopkins, I think, is a wide receiver 2 in this matchup. Seattle allows the 4th most PPR points to the position. Ryan Tannehill likely to get the start here, so don't know how that is going to impact D-Hop. I don't know if that impacts D-Hop tremendously, but I think he's definitely a wide receiver 2 in this spot for me. And then Derrick Henry, super tough to recommend him as a play. I don't think I could do it. I mean, Seattle, 20th most PPR points allowed to the position. DeAndre Swift didn't have that great of a game. And it's just really tough. I mean, he had 16 touches, 21 opportunities, I think, had 16 total yards. It is really tough to trust Derrick Henry right now. I think you play him if you have to, if you really need the body there. But he's another guy I would look at. Ty Chandler. I would try to think who else. I would play Derrick Henry over Austin Eckler. Yeah, I would do that. But I think that's about it. And then Chigo, I think, has a tight end 1 option there. And I think that is all we got, folks. So until next time, that'll be tomorrow, same time. I mean, if anything changes, we'll obviously let y'all know, but we're aiming for 3 p.m. So, until next time, y'all, good luck. Continue to, focus on the task at hand. The job is not finished, right? Got some chips to win. So until next time, y'all, have a good one. We are out of here. Peace.